Good morning, everyone. This is Father Nate, missionary priest in Italy, and thanks for joining us today, October 24th, on No Greater Delight, our podcast on Marian feasts and Marian meditations. Well, to start us off, we take our lead from the Abbot Orsini, who tells us that they celebrate Our Lady of Hermits. This is a Black Madonna in Einsiedeln in Switzerland. We're told that where there was formerly a small hermitage in the midst of the woods occupied by Saint Meinrad, till the Emperor Otho built a church there in compliance with an order which he received from heaven. This church contains a small chapel of Our Lady, which was consecrated, it is said, in the year 1418, by our Lord, accompanied by angels and saints, who performed the functions of ordinary ministers of the church in the presence of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Okay, interesting. Likewise, they also celebrate today Notre-Dame de Pitié in Saint-Martin-de-Juliers in Nièvre in Bourgogne-Franche-Comté in France. So, it was on October 24th, 1679, in the Nevers region area of central France, that people brought a lifeless child to St. Martin's Church. They set the small corpse at the foot of the altar of Our Lady of Pity, where the words Afflictis spes unica rebus, the only hope in all affliction, were carved below a Pietà statue. So that's a statue of Mary holding the dead Jesus. Falling to their knees, they sang the Salve Regina, Hail, Holy Queen, Mother of Mercy, our life, our sweetness, and our hope. And suddenly the child came back to life. Color returned to his face. He opened his eyes. He stayed alive long enough to receive the sacrament of baptism, assuring his family that his soul would go to heaven. The altar of Our Lady of Pity became a subject of pilgrimage until the French Revolution, of course, when St. Martin's Church was partially destroyed. In 1879, after doctors gave up on a young woman dying of peritonitis, her husband got the priest from St. Martin's to give her last rites. Afterwards, the priest, who had been working on reviving devotion to Notre-Dame de Pitié, offered to say a novena to Our Lady on the woman's behalf. The very next day, after the Salve Regina before the statue, the woman was better to the astonishment of her friends and doctors. In 1848, parishioners and visitors saw bloody sweat flow from the statue's dead Christ. And so for many years, St. Martin's has hosted a pilgrimage to Our Lady of Pity on the third Sunday of September, near the feast of Our Lady of Sorrows. But we remember on the 24th was when that first miracle took place. Likewise, they celebrate Notre-Dame des Doms in Avignon, in France. This monumental statue was placed on the Basilica Peak in 1859. Likewise, a very happy day, the Marians of the Immaculate Conception, that congregation was founded today in 1673 in Puszczyska Marianska Zarodów, Masovia in Poland. Again, 1673. Also today, we celebrate Maria Hilf, Maria Auxiliatrice, Our Lady of Help, in Gubel-Mennigsen in Switzerland, right? I think we had mentioned yesterday that there was an apparition at St. on the 23rd. Sometimes these dates get confused or crossed, but it doesn't matter. This is the reference to that apparition. So, the church that contains this image of Our Lady was built after a victory of the Catholic countries against the Reformed countries in the old Confederation. And this took place in the miraculous Battle of Gubel, October 24th, 1531, during the Second War of Kappel. I guess those are the confessional wars, I think. I'm reading this in Italian here. So the fact that Catholicism survived in Switzerland is often due to these the presence of these shrines, right, which are particularly venerated, or and they come from some sort of miraculous phenomena, right? It says here that in the Battle of Gubel, which was decisive for keeping Catholicism alive in the 5 cantons where they hadn't gone over to Zwingli's reform, there were 750 Catholic soldiers who were facing off against 6,000 Protestants. And their battle cry was, Mary, Mother of God. That's what they would shout. There you go. Well done. In this very battlefield, like the Catholics won the battle, right? They built a small Marian shrine in 1858 dedicated to Mary, Help of Christians in, recalling this miraculous event, right? And eventually, this little chapel became a bigger church. Always remembering that victory in the Battle of Goubel on October 24th, right? In 1531. Yep, you can see there's just a lot of details here about the church. It's very interesting. It's very, very beautiful, right? And it's again reminding us of this victory of the 750 Catholics over 6,000 Protestant soldiers. So we give thanks to God for that. And that is what we are celebrating today in the Marian world on October 24th. For today's reading from True Devotion to Mary by Saint Louis de Montfort, we continue with part 2 on the most excellent devotion to our Blessed Lady, or the perfect consecration to Jesus through Mary. And we're continuing with part 1, in what consists the perfect consecration to Jesus through Mary. Again, Saint Louis de Montfort was drawing this comparison between baptism and consecration to Mary, saying that consecration to Mary is really beautiful because we give her all of our works. In baptism, it's true, we're consecrated to Jesus Christ, but all of our good works remain ours. Then he says, and usually it's not us making that promise. He's like, it's true, we're consecrated to Jesus, but it's somebody else who's making that commitment on our behalf, saying yes for us, because usually we're babies. And he says, yeah, and then how many of us actually live that out? How many actually fulfill that promise? And he says, oh, nobody. But he says, so it's a very beautiful thing then, in order to remember this and consecrate ourselves to Jesus Christ through Mary. So let's continue then with a couple more points. This is point 128. This is so true, that is, that, we forget and we have these problems, that the Council of Sens, convoked by order of Louis the Debonair to remedy the disorders of Christians, which were then so great, judged that the principal cause of that corruption of morals arose from the oblivion, the forgetfulness, and ignorance in which men lived of the engagements of holy baptism. And it could think of no better means for remedying so great an evil than to persuade Christians to renew the vows and promises of baptism. At point 129, the Catechism of the Council of Trent, the faithful interpreter of that Holy Council, exhorts the parish priests to do the same thing, and to induce the people to remember themselves and to believe that they are bound and consecrated to our Lord Jesus Christ as slaves to their Redeemer and Lord. These are its words. This comes from the Catechism of the Council of Trent. It says paragraph 1, section 3, or chapter 3, section 4, part 1. Part 1 maybe, not paragraph. Parogus fidelum ad eum rationem co-orbitatur et sciat equissimum esse nos ipsos nos ecus blah blah blah. Okay, anyways, that's not the important part. It's literally what was said, right? These that the pastors, the parish priests, are reminded to tell the people to renew their baptismal promises. At point 130, now if the councils, the fathers, and experience even, show us that the best means of remedying the irregularities of Christians is by making them call to mind the obligations of their baptism, and persuading them to renew now the vows they made then, does it not stand to reason that we shall do it in a perfect manner by this devotion and consecration of ourselves to our Lord through his Holy Mother? I say in a perfect manner, because in thus consecrating ourselves to him, we make use of the most perfect of all means, namely, the Blessed Virgin. And then we can read point 131. No one can object to this devotion as either a new or an indifferent one. It is not new, because the councils, the fathers, and many authors, both ancient and modern, speak of this consecration to our Lord in renewing the vows and promises of baptism, as of a thing anciently practiced, and which they counsel to all Christians. Neither is it a matter of indifference, because the principal source of all disorders, and consequently of the eternal perdition of Christians, comes from their forgetfulness and indifference about this practice. So again, we really need to renew our baptismal promises, and we do that in a perfect way by consecrating ourselves to Jesus through Mary.
Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed our Marian podcast. As St. John Paul II teaches us, from Mary we learn to love Christ, her Son, the Son of God. Through her intercession, may we grow ever closer to him. We encourage you to share this with a loved one or friend and help spread our devotion to Mary. Thank you, and God bless.